welcome to another edition of Maximum Growth Live. I'm one of your hosts, Jay Ruane, CEO of Firm Flex, founder of the Criminal Mastermind, as well as managing partner of Ruane Attorneys, a civil rights and criminal defense firm here in Connecticut. With me, as always, down there, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, the Delmarva Peninsula, Seth Jay Price. What's the J for? Jehoshaphat?
It's actually J-A-Y, Jay.
Is it really?
It is.
Wow. See, look at this. I've known you for what, like 15 years? And
Yeah.
I'm actually, so it's the J and J show.
Exactly. I never thought of it that, all these years I've never really connected the two. Maybe that's why we're buddies.
Yeah, maybe.
A piece of you and me.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, if you don't know my man Jay Price over there, S.J. Price, that's what I'm going to start calling you. He is the founder and one of the two founders of Price Benowitz, that D.C., Maryland, Virginia, South Carolina powerhouse law firm, family law, criminal law, PI, just a powerhouse with 40 plus lawyers. I mean, just gone from a guy in a basement with a cell phone and his law school buddy to one of the most powerful firms in DC that actually deals with real people and real people problems like all of us do here at Max Growth Live. He also helped found the wonderful group Blue Shark Digital. I'm one of their clients, SEO for law firms. But Seth, as always, it's another week. It's Thursday. How's your week going this week?
It's going much better. And the reason it's going much better is our intake took a huge hit in Q1. It's a constantly evolving process. We talk a lot about intake, and some people call it sales, intake, what have you. Understanding we have two different worlds watching, and I live in both of them, right? We have the contingency world, the PI, med mal, workers' comp, where you don't need money in what I'll call fee for service. We looked at numbers, and our numbers of phone calls answered. I always had an answering service as backup in case we didn't get to a call. And the numbers just slipped, and it was a wake-up call. Our numbers were okay, but our PI numbers, which are one of the areas we really wanted to grow the firm, were solidly mediocre. Like, what's going on? We realized quickly the person we had at the top of our intake pyramid was not doing right by us. It was really problematic, something that I've seen before. Look, I could tell a different story next week about a different department where somebody who was one of my favorites that I've dined with my family personally has a personal family situation and just really checks out. So this guy was there, engaged to our face, which is not the first time this has happened, but not really managing a team. Again, not to go off, but like one of the things that we were told is we always promote from within and assume that the person who did it really well, substantively intake, could manage intake. Not always the case. We pivoted to somebody who had been a deputy, who was disenfranchised by the person that she had to deal with, had left or went part-time, brought her back full-time. And good news is things are humming, right? The difference of a person at the top, huge difference.
Well, and that's something I want to talk to you about. And I know we have a couple topics for today, but this brings up a good point. Promoting from within is always a good idea if it's possible. But how do you deal with, and this may be an issue where you could bring some knowledge to us from both Price Benowitz and from the Blue Shark perspective. How do you deal with promoting somebody, not necessarily based on seniority, but on talent level? Because I can see an instance where someone who's been doing something for 3 or 4 years thinks that they are the rightful heir apparent, but somebody who's only been there for 6 months or a year is a star or is better suited for that role. And then
my head exploding with different perspectives.
Okay, so
the answer is, look, the first thing we do is we look from within. We want to give opportunity. We want it to be there. I think that I have probably a little too rose-colored glasses on that. Stories that I've heard. A person from a large firm I just was in a meeting with a couple of weeks ago, they actually had somebody who could have been promoted into a more senior position, but instead kept them in the existing position, gave them the money as if they were promoted to keep them there and keep them happy, but then did a national search to bring in the right person in a senior leadership role. That's one way. I'll tell you my war story. One of the greatest moves I've ever made. Don't try this at home, kids. But we had a woman running the then Price Benowitz marketing department under me, who was fine on substance, but terrible on leadership. god awful. And there was this young intern, now second, third year junior marketing associate, who was a rock star to be. And I'm like, hey, he's not senior. And what are we gonna do? It's like a Seinfeld episode. Everything goes down to Seinfeld. When there was a couple that was dating and broke up, and Jared and Elaine each wanted to date the other person.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did here is, could I do, or the roommate switcheroo, maybe closer to that episode.
You know, my college roommate did that. He did the roommate switcheroo.
It's not easy.
It blew my mind.
And it probably does not end well. But it did not end well. No, it did not end well. But with all that said and done, I was able to keep the person who was there in management, paid them the same amount, gave them a finite task, promoted now our president, David Breton, into that managerial role, and the rest is history. So when done right, it's magical. But the whole reason I bring this up, and the reason why I think this is so important, is I got a call from the lawman yesterday. I don't get a lot of calls from the lawman, just wanted to chit chat. And he's like, okay, I got a question for you. And the question is, how do you account for when you're trying to look at intake? So to know there's a problem, many ways you do it. Look at your revenue, look at signed cases, but very often you can't tell, is there a dip in the market, right? Oh, they're not making the arrest this week in Connecticut. Like, is that the issue, or is your intake screwing up? And how do you know, right? So what he was asking was, there's a category of things. You know what's a real case. They've spoken to either your intake person, your dragon in certain instances, your lawyer, and you know whether or not you got that case. And you can very much say, got it, was rejected, or ghosted, and it disappeared. But the question is, what happens if you never make that contact? Somebody sends you a lead, you have no idea what's there. And Bill was struggling with a couple different issues, and probably not doing it full justice. But the idea first is, does this need to be accounted for with another category, which is, in our world, I hate the term, but pending initial. Is there something where you haven't yet made contact with it? Because that pending initial, if it's indicative of not calling back fast enough, those things go stale quickly. You may never speak to them. A certain amount of spam calls, or spam numbers, or people that had a thought overnight, but by morning they're not hiring an attorney, whatever it is. But your thoughts on what categories at a basic level, at a fundamental level, what categories of intake do you want to see tracked, and which ones? Because the point that I made to Bill is, I thought he should be tracking this for his purposes, because otherwise it throws off your batting average. If you take all of those as lost, and maybe they were never real in the first place, then you can't actually get your conversion rate because you're blending it in. As you add additional categories, it's one more step for your people. And every time I do that, I know this, and I have a lot of steps, that every time I add a new step, it means there's a cost. Whether it means a slightly smarter employee, whether it means people getting confused, whatever it is. What are your thoughts on what are the fundamental things that you need to see in order to tell how is your intake functioning?
So this is really interesting, because it's something that we're actually dealing with right now. We are changing our intake processing, and actually our case processing, something that I actually got from Ryan McKean, and how they do it in FileVine. We never had it in our CRM, but we're creating stages for our intake team. So what we have is a number of stages. So we have, and I'll go through them. We've got lead, intake, quoted fee, chasing, paid, signed, which are two different things, opened. Then we also have not viable.
But where does that come in?
Let me tell you the last one, which I think is the most important: lost.
Right. Well, and that's
there's a difference. So what we do is, if we have made contact with somebody and talk to them, and they seem like a viable case, and yet we never get through to them again a second time, we're able to see that they did hire somebody by looking at the dockets and that type of thing, we will mark them as a lost lead. If we get a call in at 10 p.m. at night, hits the answering service, and we call them first thing in the morning, but we call them every day for 10 days, send the text message, and just get ignored, that's a not viable. And so because it was never really anything, we can't tell. So we'd say that as a not viable client, along with the ones who simply have, don't have two nickels.
You're basically saying that if you can't make contact with them, it's not viable.
Right. I need to have some sort of contact with them.
Understood. And this is where it gets not tricky, but where it gets intellectually interesting on this area, which is, okay, humor me this. If your team is calling back at 10:30 on Monday and they called 3 people overnight and they're already taken care of by 10:30, shouldn't there be some distinction between, look, not viable because there's no money, it's not a case you could handle, versus this other sort of category where like a certain amount is not viable, agreed. Right. But is it because how many times are they chasing that not viable lead? Is it just one? And that's no, I mean, we chase every lead for at least 10 days. That's part of our system. Is that considered a lead?
Well, it's in the lead stage being chased.
No, yes. So what you're saying is
a lead is for us, a lead is a name and either an email and a phone number that says we want your services. And we don't even know what it is. It's literally like the biggest grab bag.
And this is so what if I'm hearing correct, because I like this, it's a lead, it goes through the chase process. By the way, something I'm adding in myself, trying to add some 3-dimensional pieces, trying to think about that chase process. How can it be more? Right now we're call, text, email, depending on what we have, but trying to go beyond that to other forms for higher level cases, anyway, talk more in a future episode. But what you're saying is it gets lumped in as a lead, but if it falls out, it will be given a different designation than something where you've spoken to them, even though you're in the chase, that breaks for whatever reason. That one, your team takes a dink on their batting average, where this is almost like a walk where it doesn't count towards your batting average.
Exactly. Like, for example, here's an example. Seth sends us a case, right? You say, hey, I got a referral for a case in Connecticut. We've talked to somebody because we've talked to Seth. Right. So in that lead, in the form in our system, you will either ever be retained, lost, or nothing else, because we've talked to somebody. So in that situation, my batting average will have a ding because a real person said, here's a potential lead, and we fumbled the ball and we did not. Or we
understood, but let's go back to the answering service or the overnight form. Those are the ones that are most painful.
Right.
No idea if it's real.
No idea if it's real.
Could be a salesperson. Could be somebody that really, drunk.
And if we never make any contact with them, it gets marked non-viable and it doesn't go against the batting average.
Right, which I like. And again, it's one more thing. I think for most people, it's a worthy thing to aspire to if you're not doing it. But the next question then is, how do you tell whether there's not gold, but how do you tell whether or not that category is being addressed right? We like to think, we're chasing it for 10 days. Does that mean you're getting a call a day, or does that mean they're really busy and they didn't get around to any of the chasing? And that becomes my issue.
Well, so we have one person who is the chaser. The way my intake team works is it rotates, but every week one person's sole job is chase. So they're making the 200-300 phone calls, sending those text messages. When you're on intake, it rotates it through, and essentially it goes. Every 4th or 5th week, you become the fox chasing the rabbits, and so much so that whoever is noted as the chaser for that week will change their icon in Slack to the fox.
I love it.
Because they all have, everybody on my intake team has an icon that they use, an emoji. I'm the rainbow unicorn. So when I post, I do the rainbow unicorn stuff. But I'm looking at my numbers right now. In the last 10 years, we have 16,209 not viable cases. So we've talked to a lot of people. Those are people that we may have talked to for 30 days or 6 months, and they turned into not viable because they wound up going somebody else, hiring somebody else.
Time out. So not viable versus what happens if you never make contact?
That's not viable. See, right now, I said I
So
just
what happens if you
changed.
speak
I
to
just
the
changed. I just changed and created this lost category in my CRM. So
Got you.
we used to just
you
mark everybody.
right. So you're doing exactly what I was talking to the lawman about. These great
Right.
minds are. So the idea is it's lost versus not viable. Whatever term you not viable, never.
Well, think about it from a PI perspective. You know, you send a retainer out, you never follow up with the people, they don't sign it, and they want a day later they sign with a competitor. That's lost, man, because your people didn't follow up, regardless of whether or not they hired. I mean, I lose criminal cases because of money. People say, "Hey, you know, you charge 10,000, this guy's going to do it for 3." Well, I make a note, and the good thing about that I'm thinking for the lost category is ideally we're making file notes, and we can find out, hey, when we do talk to them, why didn't you hire us? Oh, it was money, or oh, I got a referral to somebody else, and then we can start to see what the problem is.
Well,
And
so I'll tell you that's one of the things that I love when it can happen. And there's advice I give, and there's advice as I've gotten bigger I've not been able to do at scale. Like I probably need a chaser before I need this, but when you're at the scale that you can still have the bandwidth to do this, one of the things I love, particularly on criminal cases or any fee for service case, right? Because it's the different question than on the plaintiff side. When you lose a case, if you can get a hold of the person without violating bar rules and say, I'm glad you found other counsel. If you don't mind me asking, I have one question for you. If money wasn't a factor, would you have hired us? That to me was one of those quality control issues. And it does a second thing, which is I would say when we did this well, and again, I can't tell you that I'm doing it well now because it's hard to do this at scale. It's easier to do it if Jay Ruane is doing this than random person intake. But when it's done well, what I love about it is that it gives you the opportunity for somebody to say, oh man, I really wish I could go with you, but they were charging $3,500 and you charged $4,000. And there are times when you're just like, look, I don't want to let money stay in the way of it. And boom, I would argue you could probably, of the people you get a hold of, probably retain 20% or more just with that question when you have somebody savvy enough and empowered enough to be able to do that, assuming you have a Class A firm.
Right. And the other thing that goes back a little bit to sales theory that we talk about, you shouldn't be quoting the whole fee. You should be quoting the payments.
Agree, whatever it is. But assume that somebody did I'm assuming apples to apples. Look, that's a whole different issue. The second piece, which sort of goes along with this, is the check. What are your checks and balances? So this is what Umansky was sort of alluding to, was that if you allow somebody to mark something as no money, it becomes a crutch.
Yeah.
And so something you referenced a minute ago, which again, I did much more actively as a smaller firm and have not, is tracking where people go, particularly with the criminal bar. Because family, you may not see a case filed for a long time, right? But in the criminal space, very quickly, who's in there, and you generally know who's court appointed and who's not. And so something that we do in cases that are places that are heavy litigation, when you lose something, again, PI doesn't work because stuff's not in litigation forever. But if you're able to track when you don't get a case, who gets it? So you could say, okay, if it's public defender, you're not losing any sleep over it. Maybe you could sell better, maybe you couldn't, but that's a big step to go over. But looking at who is your competition, and you're like, oh yeah, that's a former associate of mine lowballing me, you know what's going on. Versus if it is substantial, there's a whole nother school of thought discussing who else are you speaking to. Some people shut down, but many people will let you know, and you know what you're dealing with. That can be huge in understanding, is it a jump ball between me and other high quality people, or is it me and a schlock and I can go a little bit harder on my experience with them?
Absolutely. One of the things that we don't really talk about is a lot of people will just throw away the data on the people that they don't retain them. It's dead. It's dead to me, and get rid of your stuff. Obviously in this day where data costs, fractions of a penny to hold, I'll tell you, we saved our firm during the beginning of COVID by going through all of my leads, going through all the ones of a certain category. So I said, all the ones that are misdemeanors and DUIs that were not, diversion program eligible in our state, go back in time, the last 5 years, and let's send them an email saying, hey, did you get a conviction? We can help you with an expungement. And we turn that into a couple $100,000 worth of money because people were getting their COVID checks and spending it on getting expungements with us, and we really saved our firm when others didn't have cash flow. We had it. And that's really something that you have to start thinking creatively about what you're going to do, and you can get data. You talked about knowing who maybe your leads are also hiring, but one of the things that we do quarterly, we used to do it monthly, but it just became overwhelming and it wasn't really giving us what we needed to know. Is we actually have the top 200 criminal defense lawyers in the state of Connecticut, and I can actually track their volume of filed appearances in cases, both in criminal cases and in motor vehicle cases. So we have what we call our marketing competition spreadsheet, where we have all of the lawyers listed that are our competition, and every quarter of the year we'll run their name and their juris number, which is how they track things here in the state, and we'll say, this lawyer, his business is staying about the same. This lawyer, her business is increasing. It's increasing. Why is it increasing? Let's look and see what she's doing. This person, they've dropped off the planet. Maybe they're retired. That type of thing. And and it's interesting because we can see trend lines, right? And that can help us. We can see who's starting to spend more in marketing in certain areas, because all of a sudden you'll see somebody that wasn't really getting in cases. Now their caseload has doubled. And then you go, and they got a brand new website and they have a whole new person working on their stuff, so that you can start to say, I've got to ramp up my competition in this area. And so there's things that you can do to counter that, knowing what you're doing.
I'm smiling because I was on a Blue Shark call the other day and somebody was saying, hey, yeah, these guys are really taking over the market. What do you think about this? I'm like, yeah, that's our handiwork. So it's kind of a cool life moment. Friends of yours.
Good. That's and that's what it's about. It's finding the data points that you can use. And it's funny, I was talking to one of the members of my criminal mastermind the other day, and then we did our session yesterday on digital marketing, and he said, I left that session and I spent the next 8 hours writing out all the things I want to do, all the things that I should be doing, all the things that I'm doing wrong, making sure that I get things straight and that type of thing. And he's like, running your practice really is a second full-time job. And you can go down rabbit holes like you and I have on some of this stuff. And so it's being cognizant of the areas where you're going to get the best return, and making sure. So for some other people, maybe tracking their competition is not the right thing to do.
Understood. And look, I'm going to conclude with this, try to bring this whole conversation 360, which is as great as it feels to get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm doing fine. As you push yourself and your marketing takes off to the next level and you add a new associate, and you have now 4 intake people instead of 2, or 2 intake people instead of 1, each level of growth comes with new problems. And that if you don't continue to look and focus on it and just say, well, it worked before, even though I've grown, that's where I've gotten burned before. And the recent burning was we grew, our volume was insane, and we weren't adapting and building. Sometimes you have to break it down to build it up, that just leaving it as is won't do it. So Jay, this is awesome. I loved attending your criminal mastermind. That was a lot of fun. And have a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you so much. All baseball, all Little League for me all this weekend. Folks, if you want to keep up with us, you can always check us live here every Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific here on Maximum Growth Live. Of course, you can take the show with you on the go wherever podcasts are available. Just look for the Maximum Growth Live podcast. Series 2022. It's got a great cover. You can subscribe and follow along. If you want to keep up with Seth, you can follow him all things Blue Shark Digital on his SEO Insider, as well as all of the social platforms for Blue Shark Digital. And for me, follow me in my group, Systemizing Your Law Firm for Growth, here on Facebook, as well as if you are a criminal defense lawyer and are interested in growing your business, please join me in the Criminal Mastermind at thecriminalmastermind.com. That's it for now. Seth, have a great weekend. Enjoy the weather. I'm going to do the same here. Bye for now.